This channel is supported by Truefire. Truefire is an online library
enough. You can get the Truefire All Access Pass for as cheap as they ever do it, the $99 thing. So just jump and do that if you're looking for the best price you can get Truefire All Access for.
So I've got an online friend, Chris, who actually bought the bath that Elodie used for the first few months of her life. Well, maybe like a year. Anyway, but Chris Butler has sort of been, I think, on the fence with buying a Helix for quite a lot of years. And he would ask me occasionally, you know, sort of questions around the Helix. And I kind of always thought, for about the last 2 years, I've kind of had this sense that there'd probably be something new coming. Now that the Helix Stadium is confirmed and, you know, expected in full, I was kind of surprised that he was still thinking, actually, the Helix Floor might even suit me better. So in this video, I kind of wanted to talk about that and, you know, why for some people the Helix Floor might still make sense, even though you know that this is a product which is reaching somewhat close to the end of its life cycle. It's still going to get some updates, is what Line 6 have said, but we're at a point now where the kind of new amps and stuff like that, because Line 6 are on the Agora phase, you know, this is not going to get new amps, right? So I asked Chris, you know, if he maybe put some thought into why a Helix Floor. So a bit of background, Chris used to use 2 EV cabs with a Roland GP100, that's the thing. So this is one of the earlier, like, great kind of modelers who could do everything sort of situation. Not in some ways that dissimilar to what modelers are today, but certainly less usable without reading through an entire manual like Chris did. The first thing that he said is, why a Helix Floor instead of a pedal board? My large stereo pedal board setup is wider than a Helix Floor. So I think in the modelling world we do think now about the Helix Floor as being quite a bulky item, but if it is just the Helix Floor that you're using, then it is roughly really equivalent to, I'd say, like an average pedal board. Now, of course, there are some people that would fly with a much smaller pedal board than this. In terms of if you actually had a mid-sized pedal board, this is roughly about the size it would be anyway, right? I think. So is size a factor? Well, if you're in the modelling space, then actually you can get smaller in 2025. In 2015, I think this actually was, you know, still not tiny, but things have sort of tended to get a bit smaller since then. It's at least what I tell my wife. The pedalboard can do only limited sets of tones at your feet during a gig, and it involves tap dancing to go from a wet lead sound to a bone dry compressed funk sound. So that is like the benefit of a modeler in general, right? Where things like snapshots, where you can't really do them so easily in the pedalboard world unless you spend quite a lot of money on like a switcher, whether that's Gig Rig or whatever, Carl Martin. Setting up a pedalboard to do something new with other pedals is a pain in the ass. Audio / power wiring, Velcro, etc. Helix Floor for my stereo rig would be 1 power cable and 2 1/4-inch cables, either to the front of house or to the tiny power amps on top of my EV cabs, or both. Complete and accurate recall of any sound I have come up with ever. And I think that's quite a cool thing about modelling in general versus pedalboard, which pedalboard is kind of like a temporary thing in some ways, right? Then he's moved on to a section here like why a Helix Floor instead of a Stadium. Line 6 still sells it new and supports it. He's put here, I hope that continues, and they say it is. If not with new features and amp models, so we know that it's not going to get new amp models, but effects and stuff like that, we can assume that if it run on the Helix, it's going to get those, at least for the foreseeable future. Now, Line 6 does have some history of eventually discontinuing products, right? Even if they do sell them new. Perhaps bug fix updates for at least 2 years. I don't know if there are too many bugs in the Helix, so that'd be... Anyway, it already sounds great, and even if it stops being updated, I would love it as it is, he says. So I think that is one of the things that, for me, when I go back through and check old presets, it does still sound great. So yeah, there's a lifetime of presets you could create with the tools it has built in. Again, I think that's true. And for less than a regular Stadium, it does everything already that I would want. It has scribble strips and expression pedal built in, which, fair enough, true. And then he says, what would make me pull the trigger if a Black Friday deal gets it closer to $1,000 US? And another thing that we did talk about was the Helix Native thing, where I think if you buy a Helix at this point, I think you get Helix Native free. And if you bought it in the past, you definitely get Helix Native at a huge discount, right? And that, for me, is actually one big thing about Helix, which is that if you were kind of using it on the road or whatever, or at gigs, then I can leave it in the car and come back and have exactly the same tones, or pretty much exactly, just with different converters in my workstation with Helix Native. So that's kind of a big thing. Then he goes on to talk about why not a Stadium. So after decades in an IT career, I'm irked by expensive purpose-built products one ostensibly owns requiring a connection to cloud servers for included features to work. Which is kind of, yeah, Quad Cortex turned me off because to share patches you were forced into their internet cloud marketplace, for example. And, you know, what about, you know, losing features if the servers go dark? And it's just the principle of being connected to the cloud, which he's not a huge fan of. Stadium capture requires cloud compute, which means you really don't own that feature. You know, and he's given some examples here. Would you be okay if suddenly JRocket goes out of business and the deep control on your dude stops working? And he points out that his 1998 Roland GP100 modeler does everything it did at 27 years ago. Now, there's one caveat to that, which is probably the software doesn't work with it anymore. And so that's kind of one of those things where it's like you have to have like an older computer that will still run. I bought a Yamaha Magic Stomp, and it was like, actually, I can't actually get in and edit any of this stuff because you can't get a connection to your computer anymore. And then he also brings up cybersecurity, which is what he works in. He doesn't like the idea of a piece of hardware tending to be left connected to the internet all the time. And he brings up the Quad Cortex Wi-Fi password incident, which, if you didn't hear about, basically a bunch of stuff got leaked from the Quad Cortex, or not necessarily leaked, but it was definitely a vulnerability. So your Wi-Fi password, if you're a Quad Cortex user from a certain date to a certain date, kind of was compromised, I think. And he says, I like the idea of my modeler being isolated and self-contained. Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, just let it be like a USB cable for the purposes of locally connecting to a programmer, or to save patches as regular files to a computer, or for system updates when you choose to. And I think that will probably be the case for most things, like, I guess, because there is a USB on the back of the stadium from the pictures. So I'm guessing that if you choose not to be completely in the Wi-Fi game all the time, that this stuff will still work. But I think there's some arguments there for maybe why the Helix Floor might make sense for some people. Now, if you don't go down the scribble strips route, the Helix LT is even more affordable. And as I say, at this moment in 2025, I feel like the Helix doesn't really sound or feel terrible at all. You know, it's not like there's something that's come along that completely blows it out of the water, in my opinion. In terms of effects and ease of use, I think it still actually looks pretty good to use, and I think it actually, like the hardware itself, I think it actually is a very nice looking piece of gear, very well designed, and I think it's kind of aged even better. Like, I think this looks better than the ToneMaster Pro, and I don't know, it's got something about it. So that's kind of some reasons that even though you know that this is at the end of its, or getting to the end of its, you know, life of updates, even so, you know exactly what you're getting with a Helix, right? You know it's been the way it is for years. It's had a series of great updates. It's as good as it's going to be pretty much right now. You know what it's going to do. You know that it's going to run Helix Native alongside it. You know, I think there's a lot to like about that as a principle. I don't know whether many people out there in 2025 are buying a new Helix off the shelf anyway, but it sounds like Chris might be. And of course, with the price coming down, I think you are going to see the Helix Floor at a fairly, you know, decent price new. So it'd be interesting to see if there is going to be a bunch of people that are thinking, yeah, I'll jump on the Helix train. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I thought that the Helix Stadium announcement would kind of necessarily slow down Helix sales in general, but it's interesting to hear from folks who are like, actually, that's what I want. I don't want to be in this new kind of cloud computing world. I don't want to be connected all the time. I like the form factor. I like the scribble strips. Yeah. If you've already got a Helix, of course, you know, doesn't need to change anything, right? And I do think the hardware itself does hold up very well in 2025 too. So that's like a testament to the design of Eric Klein, etc. And also, like, for live streaming, I still use the Helix every time I go and do a live stream, just because it is, I think, a really, really good unit for that. You know, you've got your microphone plugged in, you've got your multiple signal paths. It's like really, really easy to use for that context, and the scribble strips work really well for looping. I think it's about the only modeler that I would really consider using for a live stream, just because you need that ease of use there. Equally, like gigging wise, I think, yes, it's bulky compared to other modelers, but actually they're quite well spaced foot switches, and the color coding with the scribble strips makes it fantastic to gig. So there's a lot to like there.